Welcome, everyone. This is our third webinar in our webinar series, Starting the Year with Purpose. Our focus this evening is parent-teacher conferences and really specifically thinking about some tips and some advice and just how to make sure that we are having successful parent-teacher conferences with the families that we work with. Before we jump in, I'm just going to introduce myself. I am Jane Kofi. I am the Director of Curriculum Instruction at the Center for Responsive Schools in the Programs Department for Responsive Classroom. Prior to joining the Center for Responsive Schools full-time, I was a classroom teacher, everything from preschool through fifth grade for 20 years before joining the center full-time. I am coming to you from my home in Virginia, and I am joined this evening by some wonderful colleagues, but I am first going to introduce kind of like my co-host and colleague, Dr. Joe Tilley.
Thank you, Jane. Excuse me. I want to second what Jane said and say welcome to everybody. We're so excited to have you. And as I was watching people put their where their location and their position is, we have a very diverse group tonight, and so it's exciting. With that said, I'm Joe Tilley. I am the Programs Research Manager for the Programs Department at the Center for Responsive Schools. I work with Jane. We're in the same department. I'm blessed to have her as a colleague, as well as Alyssa as a full-time colleague. And so I'm excited to be here tonight. My role tonight is going to be a little different. And so in just a moment, I'm going to tell you about that. But before I do, just give you a little bit of background. Currently, I'm living in Nashville, Tennessee, so I'm coming to you tonight with some fabulous fall weather. If you're not jealous, you should be, because it's absolutely gorgeous here. And I, prior to working full-time with the Center for Responsive Schools, I was a classroom teacher here in the area. I've done kindergarten through 8th grade special education, inclusion, pull-out, self-contained, and everything in between. And so got a little bit of that for several years, and then moved into a district position. And so got a little bit of that experience as well. But excited to be here tonight with you and working with Jane and these incredible panelists. So during the webinar, my role is going to be kind of behind the scenes. So I get the fun job tonight of being the wizard behind the curtain. And so likely I will be off camera, which I know everybody's going to be disappointed about, but I will be off camera and handling, if you have questions, using the question and answer function that you'll find in your toolbar in the Zoom options. And so if you send that in, I'm going to be working toward that, trying to answer those questions and that sort of thing. And if you have a question that you think might be good for the panelists, you can also drop it in that question and answer, and I'll see to it that they have that. You can use the chat feature. If there's something that's said tonight that you really feel a strong connection to, feel free to connect to that as we're going through this. You know, there'll be opportunities for you to connect to that, and so feel free to do that. And then lastly, I do want to go ahead and just say a recording of the webinar will be emailed to the email that you used when you registered within a few days. So be expecting that to come in, and it'll be there for you to be able to view later on. The last thing I'll say is, as you are going through tonight, if you're starting to notice that you're having issues with anything, we always encourage you to just make sure all your other browsers and such are closed so that your internet connection can be focused on the Zoom. And then if you need to, you can always exit and re-enter, and we'll let you back in. With that said, I want to tell you that you are in for an absolute treat tonight, because we have some amazing panelists, and we also have one of the best hosts that there is. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the host, which is Miss Jane.
Thank you, Joe. All right, so just like Joe said, we are joined this evening, or this time today, with a remarkable group of educators who are going to be able to share some things that hopefully are confirming some of the things that you're doing, affirming, but then also giving you some ideas and some tips, some strategies, and some advice about successful parent-teacher conferences. And so I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. So Alyssa, if you'll start us off.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So my name is Alyssa Bruner. I live in Washington, D.C. As Joe mentioned, I work full-time for the Center for Responsive Schools in the Programs Department as a curriculum and instructional designer focused on elementary school. But before that, I taught in grades 1, 2, and 5. So not quite as across the spectrum as Jane and Joe, but close.
Hello all. I'm Hillary Woods. I am living in New Hampshire. I saw some New Hampshire folks put in their comments of where they were. I am currently a middle school teacher in Bedford, New Hampshire. And this is my 16th year in the classroom. And so thus far I have done 4th through 8th, but right now I'm living in the 7th grade land.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Ina, and I am coming to you from Brooklyn, New York. I am a New York City public school teacher in class integrated co-teaching, where I have a co-teacher that I work with. She's the general ed teacher, and we complement each other full-time in the classroom. I've been teaching in the New York City Department of Education for, this is my 24th year, and then prior to that, I've taught about 8 years in non-public schools. And a couple of other roles that I have is I am a Fly 5 ambassador, which is one of the programs that the Center for Responsive Schools offers, as well as a consulting teacher part-time for Responsive Classroom. Happy to be here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. This evening, we're going to get the opportunity to hear from each of our panelists. So you're seeing that they kind of fill across the spectrum when it comes to different areas in the classroom and in the school. And so in thinking about just family conferences and thinking about, for some schools, you may have started school maybe a month ago or 2 months ago. And for others, you've been in school for maybe 3 months. No matter what amount of time you've been in school, whether it's a couple months or even longer, we know that it's important that we are building strong relationships with families. So it doesn't matter what time of year that you're doing this, whether it's before the school year or you're starting now, we know relationships are really important when we're going into a conference. And so thinking about that piece, what are some things, and I'm thinking about specifically some things that we do to support building relationships with families, because that's going to be key if we're about to have conferences with them. What are some things that we can do to build those relationships ahead of time that helps to support the conferences we'll have later on in the year? If you won't mind, if you could start for us, Ina, what are some things that we might want to be thinking about?
Sure, thank you. A couple of things that we do at the beginning, pre-conference time with families is we have a curriculum night where it just a couple of weeks into school, families are invited to come and join us virtually and be present for our review of what our hopes and our goals are for the school year with our students. And we discuss it through the curricula that we're going to be teaching them, not just the academic curricula, but also the SEL curricula that we're going to be sharing with the students throughout the year. Another thing that we do to also build relationship with families is in the past, we've offered listening conferences so that if a parent wants to, ahead of parent-teacher conferences, have some time with us and wants us to listen to any of the concerns that they have about their student, their child, we are happy to sit down with them and just, hear what they have to say or what they shared. And a lot of times they do share a lot of positive things, but then they also share sometimes concerns and struggles that the child might have had in the past that they want to alert us to. And that's usually very helpful. And then another thing that we do, I'm a 5th grade teacher, and the children graduate from public school in the 5th grade, is we have a 5th grade breakfast where the children and the families get together for a morning meeting that we do with each other. The parents are now part of our Responsive Classroom morning meeting on that day. And the children present their hopes and goals for the year at that meeting. And then we have breakfast together, not a, like a bacon and eggs kind of breakfast, but, just something light and, finger foods that are easy to carry around. So those are some of the things that we do to help, foster relationships with the families right at the get-go.
Oh, I'm envious of the fifth grade breakfast. Oh my goodness, that sounds like so much fun. Um, I'm very similar in a lot of things that Ina suggested. That I do make phone calls at the very beginning of the school year, kind of like the listening conferences, where I just call to say hi and what do you want to tell me? Give an opportunity to listen. So similar in that respect. We also do have like an open house where caretakers can come join us and just visit, see the rooms, see the location, see what's going on, what it looks like to be in a middle school, maybe make it less scary because sometimes middle school memories are terrifying. We also send home regular newsletters that have dinner time questions, because at the middle school level, lots of times students have started to not quite answer or do things like grunt where there's not quite a clear answer. And so the dinner time questions are things that don't have a yes or no answer, so that there's some method of conversation, and just having happy mail. So sometimes getting to know each other can be tricky, especially in the middle school. And so regularly I send home what I call happy mail. The subject line really is happy mail, because when I send the email home, I send it to the student about something I've noticed about them, and then carbon copy the parents so that they can see, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I've noticed about your student, so that it's less scary later on if there's another email that comes on through.
So I want to echo both of the things that Hillary and Ina are saying, because I do think similarly. So hopefully that means we're all on the right track. Definitely trying to call every single family before conferences. Ideally, in that first week of school is when I try to get through those, get to talk to them a little bit, just hear what they want me to know about their child. I normally just say, what's the most important thing you want me to know going into this, you know? I also started something during during COVID, where I sent my students postcards, and so that they got some mail, just because we all needed a little bit of joy in our lives. But I enjoyed that, and they did too. I got positive feedback from that. I sent it directly to the children, but I think that gave the parents a sense of like who I was, and also, you know, got their kids excited about school, which everyone kind of needs that. And then also when I was teaching in younger grades, first and second grade, during that curriculum night or back to school night, or even the first day of school, we would have a half day where parents would come in with their children. I would make sure to tell them, please bring in a family photo. Let's put it up on the family wall. The little kids can get homesick, and they like to see that. And they also like to talk about their families and share about those photos. So it was a really good way for the families to see themselves reflected in the classroom, and also for the kids to feel comfortable in those early days.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about ways that we connect with families, that's really important, because if we're about to sit down and have a meeting with a family, it's important that somehow we've created a connection with them. And even when we think about the connections and the things that we're already doing, we know there's some situations in which it can be tricky to connect with families, whether it's because the experience they've had with school has been very tricky, or whether it's because there is a barrier, whether it's language, whether it's time, whether it's, I'm not able to get there because of whatever reason. Sometimes we find it's difficult or challenging to be able to connect with families, even when we are trying to do what we've usually done. So let's speak a little bit about what are some things that we can do, some strategies you've tried that you've realized these really work when I'm trying to connect with families that might be a little bit tricky to connect with. So if you don't mind starting us off with that.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. So there's a couple of different ways that folks can be tricky, especially as they're coming into middle school, right? Their experience from whatever they've had before can sometimes influence how they feel about middle school. And so I find that a lot of times reaching out with the random positive, the hi, how are you? I tell the kids and I tell the grownups when they come into my open house that I will probably call at some point during the year, and I will probably say something like, hi, this is Hillary. I'm calling from this school. I'm calling about so-and-so, just so you know, they're not bleeding, broken, or barfing to my knowledge. I'm just calling to say hi. So a lot of parents have a nervousness because the school phone number came up, right? Maybe the nurse is calling, maybe the main office is calling, maybe they're in trouble again, whatever the case may be. And so I try to make it like my first running statement is this: it's okay, it's just me. But I think there's also the inclusion of folks who speak different languages. Right now, I have a handful of students who English is not their first language, and it's not the first language of their caretaker. And so finding a way to develop that relationship can be tricky. We have done lots of different strategies. We've included our foreign language educators to be our translators in the building because they do have some language and can maneuver between conversations. We do have folks who are willing to use Google Translate. It's not always perfect, but it gets it started. And so sometimes the kid can actually speak English just as well, or maybe even better than mom and dad, and in which case, having the kid included in the conversation also helps to facilitate, especially in that middle school level where they don't usually talk a lot. So having a reason to talk and share whatever is going on are a few different ways that I certainly work with whomever I need to talk to.
I want to add on to Hillary. I agree with a lot of the things that she's done, and we've done the same, especially when it comes to, we have a trilingual community in our classroom. And while I can fudge some Spanish, I can't with Arabic. And so we do have many educators in the building. Some may be paraprofessionals, some are teachers, and we even have a speech provider. And I asked them if they'd be willing to help us out with some of the, and a lot of times they just offer, do you want me to call the parent for you? And that is really a way that'd be very helpful with making sure that those kinds of tricky situations where we're not speaking the same language, our home languages are different, can be a way of troubleshooting something like that could, potentially be an obstacle. Something else that I feel is really important when I'm in a tricky situation with communicating with families is when I speak with colleagues who may have had that child's family in the past and have them reveal to me what were things that worked for them that were successful. Sometimes having that knowledge gives me some ideas that maybe I didn't think about that I might be able to incorporate in my own communication with the family. And then another thing that I think is really important is empathy. It's just being able to have perspectives and, take perspectives for what their situations might be that might be different from my own. And even if they are similar to my own, it's just putting myself in their shoes. Helps me to really become more empathic and have a better perspective for what it is that they're going through. That really helps take the conferencing and the tricky situations that might occur a little bit further and build that relationship.
So I agree with everything, again, that Ina and Hillary were saying. And I think considering those barriers that might be present for those families is of the utmost importance. I think that both Hillary and Ina gave great suggestions about language barriers. And one more that I'll throw out there is that photos are universal language. So if you're sending emails and you can include a photo of the child looking happy, they don't have to be able to read it. And you don't need a translator to show that that child was happy that day. Going off of that same boat, I think going back to what Hillary was saying about happy mail, sending frequent correspondences, maybe for families that are tricky for other reasons, maybe because they've had a really hard time with their children's teachers in the past, where every time they call, it's just not what they want to hear, right? So you don't want them to see your name pop up in their email and then to know automatically it's negative. So sending those positive, frequent correspondences, just, hey, your child said something really awesome today, here's all it is. And letting them know right in the subject line, like, this is positive, put a smiley face, put an exclamation point, say, yay, Jordan, whatever it is, to let them know, like, this teacher is reaching out with positive news, so that when those trickier conversations have to happen with those trickier parents, it might have an avenue to do so a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And as I'm listening to people share about some of those ways to navigate connecting with families where it might be a little bit more challenging to do so, recognizing like it's not a situation where I tried and oh well, and then we just stop. But if this didn't work, then what else can I do? So if sending it in writing isn't the best way for that family, or calling is not the best way for that family, then what do I need to do differently rather than, well, I call all my families and I called this one family and they didn't understand. And so I'm just going to keep going. Because the idea is if we want families to be able to come in so that we can share all of the amazing things that their children are doing, but then also places where they can grow, we got to get them into that space first. And that really does mean taking the time to do something a little bit differently. So that means I've never contacted a translating service. I know our county had one. This time I need to do that. I need to do something a little bit different. If it means talking to other teachers who've had that family before, then I need to do that instead. And for some people, it may mean I go to where they are, as opposed to asking them to always come to where we are, to think about that piece. And so we've chatted a little bit about some of the things that we want to do beforehand so that we can build those relationships ahead of time so families can make that connection, know who you are and why you're there and what you feel is important for them to know about their child, but also for them to share with you what they feel is important for you to know about their child. Also, let's think about, now we've built these connections. What are some things that you do within the conference, within that meeting time, to make sure it's successful? Because you can build a whole lot of relationships and they can be positive, and then you bring families in and then it kind of breaks down and it's like, what just happened? So what are some things that you do to ensure that during that time, it's a successful time for not just you, but also for that family as well? Alyssa, if you don't mind starting us off.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that I really like to do is to get the students' voices in the conference. So to provide them with an opportunity, if it's first grade, it might just say, I glow at and I want to grow at, with a picture of a flower, and they write a few words, right? And when I was teaching fifth grade, it was more of like a formal assessment. Like, here are the great accomplishments that I had. Here are the places I could have improved. Next semester, I want to consider this. I think that parents really enjoy looking at the conference through the lens of their child, and they also really enjoy seeing the connections then between what I'm showing them and what their child is seeing. Because even in first grade, a child would say, I got better at writing sentences, and I could show the parent work of that child of them writing sentences. So it's amazing to see the children involved in their own thinking and learning process. And also, that being said, showing the children's work, I think during the conference, it can speak for itself. It can speak volumes. And if you do have something tricky to show them, showing them with the evidence, parents believe in their children. They want what's best for them, of course. So if you have to show them, this is something that's an area of concern, having that right there to look through together and to go through in tandem and make a plan about, it's better to have that actually physically there.
And I'd like to add on also that for us and our conferences to be successful, one of the things that we have done because of the pandemic is we have had virtual conferences. One of the things that has remained as a result of the pandemic are the virtual conferences. We find that our attendance with virtual conferences has increased parent attendance, family attendance at a conference. So the caregivers have come to us and done conferences while they're commuting, for example, as long as they can get access to the virtual conference meeting link. Then that gives us more of an option, as opposed to as Jane was saying before, having to have the families come to us. It provides a way of making it a little bit more flexible. Another thing that we do is if conferencing time is not appropriate for a particular family for whatever the reason, out of town, or they can't make it because of work or whatever, then we do a makeup conference. We'll just reschedule it for a time that is available for them. And sometimes that means that we go a little bit above and beyond. And if it means a lunch conference, between families and teachers is what we have to do, then we'll do that. to make sure that we can make that connection, because it's just that important. We don't just teach the children, we also have relationships with their families as well. And that's just as important. And then another thing that we do that I really love, I was like, oh my gosh, the students are going to leave the conference. They're only fifth graders. But the fact that the kids get to reflect on their work in their voice at the conference, it is quite an icebreaker. Each and every time that we've done it. It's been, I think, about 4 years now that we've done this. And the kids are pretty nervous, but they're just reflecting on their work, and they're usually pretty honest. And then the parents become really proud to hear them speak about their work in all their honesty, whether they're doing something that is a strength or whether they're talking about something that they want to improve. And so having the students lead the conferences has been a really refreshing way of us, building that connection with families during conferencing time.
Of course, it is no surprise that I am like, yes, all the things, definitely including the student's voice, right? Letting them be able to, even if they're not participating in that moment, what they know about themselves is just as important, if not more important, than what we know about them. Yes, all those things for sure. One of the things that I like to do is ask before parents or caretakers arrive at the conference. So when they sign up, what questions do you have? Because sometimes the questions are things like, how do I read this report card? I don't even know what I'm looking at. And that can guide, okay, well, let's talk about this. This is how to read it. This is what this means. This is whatever the question is. Then the parent gets exactly what they need. Because I can always talk at another time about struggling on a test or how to do differently or how to do different study strategies. But if they're globally confused by how grading works or how it looks or how it appears, then that's really an important piece to get out of the way so that the rest of the conversation can happen. And like Ina said, sometimes that means a different time. Maybe it's not the same night that every other conference had happened. Maybe that's, I gave them the conference time, we talked through the report card, and then we're going to follow up with, hey, let's talk about that particular thing on the report card. I find that parents really appreciate when I take notes, when I write down that they're concerned about whatever, or that they're really proud of something else. And that then I do plan a follow-up. So whether that's an email or a phone call later on, it's a way to check back in and say, so how's it going? Like, we talked about this thing, how's it going now? I think those things help to reiterate that I really am interested not only in the student, but in the family supporting that student.
Hillary, as you were talking, I was reminded of a few things when it comes to making sure that the conferences that we have are successful for everyone. It seems so small, but can have a huge impact. And if you've ever been in this situation, then you know what that feels like when you go for an appointment for something and it's at this time, and then you're waiting for like a certain amount of time, and it changes how you feel when you go into that appointment, because your appointment was at 10:30. But now you're waiting and it's 10:40. So you can imagine what that would feel like as a family if you've got this time frame, whether it's virtual, over the phone, or in person, and it's supposed to start at 10:30 and it starts at 10:35 or 10:40. It changes your mood and the way that you appear and that you seem to present yourself in that particular conference, whether it's you because now you're frazzled and you're like, oh my goodness, this next one comes in, but then also that family that's been waiting and what message that sends to the family. Like, so mine was at this time, are you going to extend mine? Or is mine only going to be 10 minutes because it started 10 minutes later? And as I think about that, one of the things that we want to make sure is that, yes, we've got maybe several families that we're going through, and we're thinking about several conferences that we have. But if it feels like a factory, then families feel that and they don't feel heard. What happens is they walk in and you're thinking about the time because this next family is coming in 10 minutes later, and they're thinking specifically about their child. and our focus changes. So let's speak specifically about how do we make sure that when we do have families coming in, that they feel heard. Now, it's not like a pretend heard, like, tell me about what your questions are, but truly heard during that time that they're with us. And if you don't mind starting us off with that question.
Sure, I'll be happy to. One of the things that I think works for me to make sure that families feel heard is to always be thinking positive about the conversations that we're going to be having, finding the strengths, accentuating them with the students, and then also building that bridge for when we might need to talk about some of the challenges that the students might be having. I think that when families are bringing their concerns forth in a conference and they want to make sure that they're heard, it's important for me to emphasize that this is team so-and-so. So, whatever the child's name is, whenever they feel and they hear that I'm considering that we all are together a team, working toward that particular child's goals and needs and concerns, I think that softens them a lot of the time. And usually when I use that phrase, they often smile a lot, when we've had a chance to just really start thinking about what it is that we're going to do and what are the strategies that we're going to put in place to help that child. And as Hillary had said before, make sure you revisit, if you're sharing a strategy, check with the family if they're okay about that. And then, let's check back, in a little while, a couple of weeks or days or whatever it is, whatever the time length is, and make sure that, you again get a chance to dialogue about it as we progress. And I think that really helps families a lot when they're feeling like as though they want to be heard about their concerns.
I would absolutely agree. No surprise there, because I feel like you and I should teach together. One of the things that you said was that this is team so-and-so. I like to call middle school a team sport. It is all hands on deck. And so that is a very common phrase that I use. And I think even when there's a time crunch, we actually have signage that we put up every conference session saying, your time is valuable to us. If we've gone over your time, please knock on the door. That way we can make sure that we end the conference before you and make sure we value your time, your time here, because it does matter. And it is a busy night. There's a lot of folks in the building. And so I think just acknowledging that we're going to do our best to stay on time. And also you can knock on the door to say, hey, it's my turn. I think that's an important piece as well. I usually start off with some sort of overview, global overview of this is what it looks like to have your student here. And then I stop and ask for questions. What are some things that you're thinking about or as you came into the conference today? I could go on forever, but what do you want to talk about? And that allows the caretaker to kind of guide the conversation, because I don't really have a hard and fast, we need to get to this in this conversation. I have we need to talk about this young human in this conversation. So those are a few pieces. And I think I always try to end, knowing that I'm going to follow up, I always try to end with, it has been such a pleasure to meet you. I can totally understand why so-and-so student is such an incredible human. It's been such a pleasure. And I'm so excited to follow up with you in, gosh, we said a couple of weeks, right? So I'm looking forward to touching base with you in a couple of weeks to see how that strategy is going and see if maybe we need to change it. That helps the parents to know that the conversation is ending and I'm going to talk to you soon. This isn't over for the year. It's over for tonight. Kind of closing up in a way that says you matter and I'll talk soon.
I agree with it's just a lot of us agreeing with each other, right? But it means that hopefully, like I said before, we're on to something. But I agree that using the terminology like this is team so-and-so, I think that is so important. And it just tells the parents like, we're with you. and we're going through this together. I also think following up with the parents is crucial, and taking notes during the conferences. We even share our notes at my most recent school. We take notes on a shared document when we were virtual, or we would physically write it and then scan it and send it to them so that they have a copy of it. And whatever your follow-up plan is right there for them to see as well. And then you are really held accountable to do it, right? So everyone, they see that their concerns are being addressed seriously. They have it right there for themselves to reference. They see the notes that you took that tell them, wow, they were really listening to me. And I think that that's powerful. And I like to start, I know Hillary said she likes to end, but I like to start by saying, like, tell me, how is your child reporting that the school year is going so far? I want to hear it from them. Are they saying anything specific? Are there any friendship things that are going on that maybe are not on my radar yet? I want to hear from them. Like, what is your child saying at home, and how can we work together on Team Your Child to support them?
Yeah, I feel like everyone slightly touched upon, when it comes to ensuring that families feel heard, it's not only what we do, but also what we say. And just even this is team such and such is important. But then we also know the language we use in general, whether it's with other adults, whether it's with children, that's also really important. And it's especially important when we're connecting with families. And so when we think about the words that we're choosing to use, or even how we open up a conference, the ways that we do that can either put a family in a space where they're like, okay, this is going to be okay. Because for some families, when they go to a conference, there's this feeling of, I have to go to a conference, I have to go to the child's school, I have to go to my child's school for this reason. And no matter what, it's just that feeling that always comes up. And for all of us, there's different things. Like if you have to go, like that's me and the dentist, like I have to go to the dentist. And so I'm going to the dentist, that's that feeling. And it's not that just me just saying, or the dentist just saying, it'll be okay, it's fine, that I'm like, oh, okay, then I'm fine. It's more than that. And sometimes it's their actions, sometimes it's their words, it's sometimes what they don't say that I'm like, why are you not saying anything? And it makes me nervous. We can create that same kind of environment for families, whether it's over the phone, whether it's in person, whether it's virtually, by sometimes just the things we say, what we do, how we start the conference. So our words really matter. What are some ways that you use language that helps put families at ease? So whether it's the way you open, what you say in between, what you say at the end. And I'm noticing some people in the chat thinking about, it is really challenging when you're like, I've got the next one in like 3 minutes, but the language we use does matter, where that family's like, oh, okay, I know you're going to connect with me, or, oh, you're rushing me out. That's how it feels. So what are some of that language that we want to be mindful of when we're speaking with families? Alyssa, if you don't mind starting us off with that one.
Yeah, definitely. I'll speak to the time thing a little bit, just because it seems like it's on the forefront of everyone's mind. I like to put a digital clock right on there, and I like to post the schedule right on the outside of the door. Like, we're not trying to rush you, but we also want to value your time, and we want to start at the time that you wanted to start at, and we want to end at the time that it's just a respect thing for everyone. So I think having it be very transparent. Here's the schedule. You can see somebody's coming right after you. Here's the clock. You can look at it and squeeze in those questions if you need to. And again, ensuring that we are going to follow up. Speaking about the language, it kind of is repetitive to what we were saying before, but I really think that those words of like, we are a team here, I think that's super important to convey. I also think providing that space for them to give you feedback, and how are things going? What have you been hearing? How is your child feeling? What do they seem like when they get home? Like really giving open-ended questions to the family that provide them the space to share about anything, not how's your child doing in math? Like, do they practice their math facts? But just generally speaking, how is your child reporting that school is going, so that they can bring up whatever is probably of the utmost concern for them at that time.
I think also something that comes to my mind, and that I have actually said, is something that I learned from my brother one time when I wanted to speak with him, and he didn't have the time to give me. And what he said, and what I use now, is that, I really want to focus completely 100% on what it is that you want to share with me. But I don't have the time right now, or I need to move on to the next conference, and then just offer, an opportunity for you to reconnect again, so that they know that you want to give them your full attention and that you can at the moment. And that's very real, especially if you've been conferencing, for hours, we also get depleted. That's a way of giving ourselves a little bit of self-care, and saying, I'm not at my best right now because it's the end of the day, or I just don't have the time. And put it on you and just say, I'd be happy to meet up with you another time, or whatever, is convenient for you. And then we can continue our discussion. I think that that's some language that I've learned from him that I like to use with families.
It's funny, I say something very similar. So, what I was thinking is I have at this point, by the time conferences roll around, I have talked to every caretaker at some level, whether that's one phone call, whether that's 15, I have spoken to them on the phone. So I feel like one of the first things I say is, oh my gosh, you look like your voice. It's so lovely to meet you, because I don't know them necessarily, right? They know me because they have, a handful of teachers, and I have a lot of students and they have a lot of caretakers. And so that's usually my kickoff, and it brings a smile to every face I've said it to, because it's a connection. We've already connected on the phone, but wow, you being in person, you look exactly the way you sounded. Come on in, let's chat. And so it's not a new conversation. It's a continuation of what we had already started. And it feels more like when a friend that you haven't seen in person in a while stops in for coffee. And it's a coffee conversation and an acknowledgement that, hey, we'll talk again soon. That throughout the year allows for everyone to know that it's not ending, that in 180 days, we'll have talked more than the couple of conferences that I'm required to speak to you at, that you matter enough that we'll talk a lot, because I'm going to have your student for the whole time. And so I think connecting in those ways, connecting what you've already done to bring that into the forefront, that I'm the person you talked on the phone with last week or 2 weeks ago, is a really important gesture to clarify that you're still you and you haven't turned into like this mean teacher or the Grinch or anything like that. You're still the same person. You're just now in front of them.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about that idea of the language that we use, especially when it gets to the end of the conference, and you notice that family has still more to share. And I remember within conferences saying to families, I'm noticing we have about 5 minutes, and it sounds like there's so much more you'd like to share with me. But I want to encourage like a little bit of a flip to what sometimes we say to families, which is you can call me, you can reach out with questions, but flipping it and saying, when can I call you? Or when can I email you? What works for you? And then you can follow up with them. So it feels different than, you can reach out anytime with any questions, or because as a parent, I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not going to do that. But if you tell me that you're going to, and they're like, oh, you actually really do actually want to hear what I have to say. So I'm going to tell you everything now, as opposed to, yeah, well, I guess they don't really have time, and I'm not going to do it, because I'm thinking about like, well, sometimes I don't have time as a teacher. And so probably this person doesn't have time either. But if that person is like, hey, we had 5 minutes left in our conference and you sounded like you had more to share, or there was one place we stopped, I want to be able to follow up. Is this a good time, or when is a good time? It's another way of having families feel heard and seen. That is such a small little flip, but allows, at least as a parent, I'm like, oh, okay, well then, yes, I will share more information with you because you asked, and allowing them to do that. As we come to the close of our time together, I want us to think specifically about what is something that you feel is most important for educators to keep in mind during conferences with families. Marie, are you comfortable sharing that with us?
Sure. I think it might be a repetition, but I think it really is valuable enough to reiterate. And that is that this is a team event, that we are looking to support the growth of the caretaker's biggest treasure, right? They send their treasures to us every day. And so it is our task to support the growth of that treasure, that it's not a gotcha, and that lots of families come in feeling like they're being called to the principal's office. Like it is a gotcha, and we're going to come out with like, oh, and then this happened. But really, as long as we continue to acknowledge that maybe it is a little nerve-wracking to show up at the school, but that this is a team event and that we're looking to support the growth of this young person as a team, that they have a role in it, and so do we. It's not one-sided, that everyone is in charge of helping out. I think it also helps to refocus on the idea that when caretakers come in and they might be nervous, sometimes their tone doesn't match what they're trying to say. And so hearing the words they're saying more than the tone of voice they're using is another way to make sure that we know that this is a team event and that we're working on this together, and that maybe I don't acknowledge the tone right now. I'll just acknowledge that, yes, I hear your concern. So, so that it doesn't become a defensive piece of the conference.
To me, the most important thing is getting across to the families that I know their child and I see their child. So I think as long as I can give them that sense that, like, yes, I am with your child often. You know them the best, but I know them pretty well. I think that helps them to feel comfortable, and that opens them up. So I really try to make a connection. Something that they've said recently, a way that they act, like their best quality. You know, your kid has a great sense of humor. Wonder which one of you he gets that from. Something that shows them, like, you know, our kid, and we appreciate that. I think that can go a really long way.
And for me, I think one of the most important things to remember is that, yes, I am their teacher, but the families are the first teacher. And they have a knowledge of the child that really extends beyond what I get to know about the child in the year that I spend with them. So it's important for me to remember that they are the first teacher, and that also that I need to listen actively to what it is that they're sharing. And by that, I mean listening to understand what it is that they want to share about their children.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing just some really strong advice that hopefully people can take away and say, yeah, these are things I'm already doing and I'm on the right track, or these are things I want to start to incorporate in the ways that I work with families. Dr. Jo Tilley, are there questions that we can answer as a whole that we didn't get to yet?
Yeah, Jane, I think there's a couple of questions that would be appropriate to work through. And the first one is, would you use the child's reflection of self and work with kindergarten students in the conference?
It's a great question. And any of us can take that.
So I've never taught kindergarten, but I've taught first grade. It's close. At the beginning of the year in kindergarten, you know, their writing skills are probably not going to be to the point where they can write a reflection. But I do think you could present them with the same type of activity that I was talking about for first grade. I glow at, I need to grow at. There's like great visuals with a flower and like a potted seed, and explain that visual and that analogy. And you can help them by having them tell you something that they're proud of and something that they want to keep working on. And if you need to describe that for them, great. If they can draw a picture, or if they can make their best attempt at writing something next to it, I think even though it's a small thing, parents will love to see that their child is being self-reflective in kindergarten. I mean, that sounds adorable and like something I would keep forever. And also it's just a really great practice for the child to start thinking about their own learning.
Right. Thanks, Alyssa.
Thank you, Alyssa. And here's one, and this one I actually really like this question. And I've been sitting here ever since it came in, trying to even think about like how I would answer it. But thinking back to when you were a first year teacher, what were the things that you did as a first year teacher to help establish those relationships with parents or guardians?
Call first, call often, call day one, start the conversation way before you're scared. Because when you call because there's an issue, oh, is that wicked hard? But if you call because, hi, that's it, I'm just saying hi, it is way less scary. And they become people as opposed to scary things out there. My first year, my mentor suggested it, and I was like, that is a no. And she was like, I will sit here with you and I will give you words. We're going to practice the words you're going to say when you call. And I was like, okay. And she told me a script. I scripted out what I was going to say. It was literally, hi, I'm Hillary. I'm your student's teacher for this year. I was just calling to say, hey, how are they feeling? It was not a difficult thing to say. And yet the dialing felt like torture. But once it was done, every parent knew that I cared enough to spend 5 minutes calling to say hi. So start early and call often, or contact often, not always call, contact often.
You know, Hillary, now that you say that, some of the student teachers that I've had in the past, one of the things they did was to send almost like the postcard that Alyssa was saying, but it was a postcard that went home that said, hey, I'm working with your students this year. This is a little bit about me. I can't wait to get to meet you and learn more about you and your students. Kind of like a gentle icebreaker if you're not ready to make that move, but hopefully you do move that way. But it's something to kind of get you moving towards connecting with families.
Yeah, and I will be just I will only add in my first position as a teacher, the duty that I got assigned was car duty in the morning. I had to stand outside as kids were being let out, and it was looking back on it, it was the perfect thing for me because Hillary, to your point, like, I had already seen my parents, I had interacted with them and almost had a rapport with them before I ever had to engage in conversation. And so I just encourage everybody, you may not get that opportunity or like afternoon dismissal or things like that, but just any opportunity that you have to meet, see, or come face to face with a parent before you're actually engaging in a conversation, because I can remember how much the ability to just open that door and say good morning to somebody as you were helping their kid get out, it just went a long way, because you weren't this anonymous voice, you were a person. And so I think that anytime that you can do that, that's also positive. So just wanted to add that.
Thanks for adding that. All right, so I'm going to leave our group with a few things to keep in mind. One is a resource that can be helpful when you're thinking about building relationships with families, but then also what's coming next in our webinar series. So I'm going to take a moment to share that with us. So this is a resource that would be helpful to be able to think through ways to partner with families. You might find that there are things that you're already doing and it helps affirm that, and then maybe some new ideas that you can gather from that as well. Something else to keep in mind is our webinar series and what's coming up next. So this is our third in the series. We've got one more that's really focused on just student engagement. And that one will be next month, November 17th, before we jump into our second part of our series, where we'll have 4 new webinars that you can join us for every third Thursday of the month. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to check our website, or you're thinking about bringing Responsive Classroom to your school or your district, you can contact Educational Partnership at crslearn.org. And feel free to reach out with questions. If you have questions for me, feel free to do that. But thank you for joining us this evening and being here to hear from these remarkable educators about all the different ideas that you can use to help support you with conferences. And with that, we wish you the best with the conferences that you do have coming up, and also wish you a really good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us.